I'm Katharine Gun, and I worked at GCHQ as a Mandarin linguist and analyst in 2001 to 2003, and I blew the whistle on the NSA memo that was basically asking for GCHQ's help to spy on UN Security Council delegates in order to be able to influence them on the vote which would authorize the invasion of Iraq. And I leaked that, and I got charged with breaking the Official Secrets Act, and eventually they dropped the charges against me.
So why did they do that then?
Why did they drop the charges? Well, none of us are particularly clear about why, apart from my speculation is that, first of all, they would never want to have a intelligence officer on the stand in a jury trial. And secondly, it was before the general election in the UK, and so they probably didn't want the Labour government at the time, Tony Blair, didn't want the country to be focusing back on the Iraq war debacle and the crimes. And also, potentially, they didn't want a jury to find me not guilty, even if I said I was the one who did it, but it was because of protecting people from harm. It was a public interest defense, which there isn't any defense under the Official Secrets Act. When you're charged with it, you're basically guilty. You have no defense under the Official Secrets Act. And if the trial had gone through, and because I pled not guilty, if the jury had said, yes, we agree, she did it for the right reasons and she's not guilty, then that would set a precedent under all of the Official Secrets Act Section 1 charges. And so in future, people would maybe be able to use that as a defense as well. And so by dropping the case meant that they never had to set that up as a precedent.
Fascinating. Anyway, look, this week, come up to the present, we've got this fascinating report, well, some find fascinating, by Jeremy Hunt, parliamentary report, saying that the enormous mistakes were made back in March 2020 with COVID, in that we locked down too late, and that is what has really led to so many lives being lost.
Yeah, well, that is a load of bunkum, in my opinion, because there have been papers produced. If you search for research papers on the actual effectiveness of lockdowns and what they call non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPIs, those show that lockdowns have not had any meaningful effect on saving lives. In fact, if you look at countries who look down harder, their deaths generally are higher than the ones that didn't force people into really harsh lockdowns. So this kind of so-called report is another one of these whitewashing reports that basically try, on the one hand, to assuage the government's guilt, and on the other hand, set the scene for the next potential lockdown scenario where people will jump on the bandwagon and say, look, we didn't lock down earlier last time. We've got to lock down really harsh now in order to protect lives. And that's what New Zealand's doing. We've seen that New Zealand did that. And Prime Minister Ahern has finally come out and said, well, actually, lockdowns don't appear to be working. So why is the UK government coming out with these ridiculous reports about that? I mean, it's driven by the people on the left, I think, because that was the main cry on the left, was that, well, should have locked down sooner. That was the only thing that they said.
Also, there's been a lot of articles around, particularly on last week, the BBC, but various other articles, The Guardian, etc., talking about how the treatment, which has been talked about for COVID, which we now know, maybe back in March, wasn't so well known. In fact, I'm pretty sure it wasn't, is actually just a horse dewormer. There seems to be a sort of contest over these treatments like chloroquine and ivermectin, with Donald Trump talking about chloroquine, various people around the world saying, well, actually, ivermectin is an incredibly important and useful treatment for COVID, whereas over here, the only treatment, and in the States, seems to be the vaccine.
Correct. It's, in the US and the UK, it's the vaccines as well. That's not treatment, that's prophylactic. But even though they claim it as a prophylactic, we know that it doesn't prevent transmission or contagion. So it's not actually a prophylactic, and it's not even a treatment. So it's utterly and totally useless. But the other drug that is used, I believe, in the US and the UK is remdesivir, which is a drug which is also an expensive new drug that hasn't been given FDA approval yet. And I've read by people who've researched remdesivir when it was used previously in cases of Ebola, that it causes major organ failures, systemic organ failures. And this is what we're seeing in a lot of COVID cases, hospitalized ICU COVID cases, that they're claiming that, COVID causes systemic organ failures. And you've got to ask yourself, what were they treated with? If they were treated with a drug that actually has the side effect causing renal failure and so on, then it's the drug. It's a side effect of the drug. It's not SARS-CoV-2 or anything. And so this is the big problem, is that there isn't enough transparency. When a patient is diagnosed as a positive case, and again, that's something that isn't transparent. We don't know what the cycle threshold is for their PCR test in order to diagnose them. So they come out and they claim that somebody is COVID positive, whatever that means. And then on top of that, they treat them with drugs that are not openly talked about or discussed. And if the person passes away or suffers long COVID, as they like to use as a excuse for why it's so important to get vaccinated, long COVID, well, is it because they were actually treated with the wrong types of drugs while they were in hospital, or that they weren't actually treated soon enough? And so their bodies, went into further infection and further problems. No time in history have people been told when they've been ill with something, apart from colds and sometimes flu maybe, to go home, make yourself a Lemsip and just rest at home. Don't come to the doctors. At no time was a notifiable disease, which, by the way, I believe COVID-19 is a notifiable disease. At no time have they told people to just go home and wait until you can't cope anymore and then call us. I mean, that, to me, that's a crime, preventing people from seeking treatment until they get past the stage where they can heal easily and rapidly.
We're talking about a whole committee of MPs here that have come up with this. And Jeremy Hunt, as a former health secretary, his committee is the Health and Social Care Select Committee. You're saying that are you medically qualified to take on this Health and Social Care Select Committee and this former health secretary, who apparently are the experts in this, really?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm not claiming to be an expert in anything, but I've read a lot in the last 18 months. As it happens, I'm also serendipitously a member of, or sort of a loose, as an interested party, member of a loose group of doctors and scientists that go by the name Doctors for COVID Ethics. They have a weekly sort of town hall meeting. And, I have been tuning into their town hall meetings since about December last year. So, I can say that on balance, I think I've had the privilege of seeing and hearing medics and virologists and geneticists talk in great depth about these issues surrounding COVID. And I dare say, I don't believe Jeremy Hunt has any sort of medical qualification. Neither do I suppose he has even a scientific qualification. I don't know about the rest of the MPs on the select committee, but, you know, I think the fact that Tessa...
Tess Laurie, yeah.
Yes, Tess Laurie.
Sorry. It's Dr. Tess Laurie,
yes, Dr.
of the Evidence-Based Medicine Consultancy here in Bath, who, by the way, has worked for many years for the World Health Organization and the National Health Service, countering disinformation from the pharmaceutical industry and showing evidence to those organizations where the very powerful pharmaceutical lobby is bamboozling them to buy drugs that don't work.
Right. Well, there you go. And as I believe, I think her British ivermectin group, which goes by the name of Bird, I think they got banned from Twitter. But this is the problem, that people who have no skin in the game, who are basically trying to provide care because they genuinely care. I mean, I think you can tell when you actually listen to these people in interviews, like Dr. McCullough in the US, who's treating patients, and Dr. Corey in the US, and there's many of them, and the ones in the UK who are trying very hard to do the best in very difficult circumstances. You can tell that they genuinely care from their tone of voice, from the expression in their face, from their eyes. You can tell that this really, really matters to them.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Bird Group UK, which is Tess's group, has been suspended from Twitter. Quite whether it's ever going to be back is a good question.
I mean, it's astonishing that doctors, in fact, the Doctors for COVID Ethics group Twitter handle is regularly shadow banned. I don't think they've been suspended yet, but these are qualified experts. They're eminently qualified experts, but they're not allowed to debate. Many of them have tried to seek debate. You know, they've put themselves forward. They've requested. They want to go on TV. They want to go on radio. They want to talk about these issues with their so-called opponents, the ones who are promoting the government narratives, and they don't get invited. You know, they're not. It's not even a possibility. So this is the reality, is that there's no debate. And if they're so sure, if they keep saying that there's, you know, the science is, well, now they're not even talking about the science is settled, because they can't say that anymore because it keeps changing. Now they're talking about consensual science, you know, science of consensus, which is a joke, because you can't come to it. Science isn't a consensual thing. It's a, you know, they argue amongst themselves, and there's quite a lot of egos in science, I believe. So everyone's trying to, you know, force their narrative to the fore, and it's survival of the fittest, you know, can basically out-argue everybody else with facts and data, wins. But that no longer seems to be the case. Just like they silenced or ignored the JCVI's advice in the UK about vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. And in fact, you know, although they're saying that it had nothing to do with disagreements, but some of the top JCVI individuals left before that vote went through, that they actually agreed that, okay, 12 to 15-year-olds could take the vaccine on balance. Good, genuine, ethical, principled, moral people are either silenced or forced out of their jobs.
Okay, Katharine. Well, look, just take a step back from it all to sum up. What's going on?
Well, I mean, your guess is as good as mine, Tony. You know, I think there clearly was an agenda to push this sort of medical authoritarian system, surveillance system into play, because various pandemic exercises simulated these sorts of activities, whereby they did shut down debate and they did dominate the narratives, and they did insist on these surveillance systems, whole population surveillance systems. I think this is part of it, because there's so much money. There's so much money in the pharmaceutical medical model of disease management, of prescribing cocktails of drugs for people to manage their symptoms. I mean, I think that's one aspect of it. It's just the pure profit motive. But on the other hand, there's other things going on, as we all know, an agenda to sort of force through a utopic vision of the future where we will own nothing, apparently, Tony, but we'll be happy. To me, it looks like the forcing down of the middle classes, the educated, well-educated, upper and middle classes, really pushing them back into sort of pre-1950s type of situation. The wealth gap is extraordinary. The cost of living is increasingly difficult for many people across the world. And so all their sort of statements about equality and justice and a fair and sustainable world, it all seems like hogwash to me. It seems like whitewash compared to the reality, because the reality is millions more are now impoverished. The Sustainable Development Goals will not be achievable under current circumstances. They're simply not achievable. But yet they continue to parrot that sort of language to appeal to people who, I don't know, who are still living in 1998. I mean, the British government likes to churn out all sorts of statements that have no basis in fact. And they keep claiming that the vaccines have saved millions of lives. I don't know how they get that number and how they calculate it. But in actual fact, the Office for National Statistics have now published, there's sufficient data to show now that the number of people who are dying at home, and majority of them are dying without COVID, on their death certificate. These are people who are dying of all sorts of other reasons. The total is over 70,000 people have died, above the 5-year average at home. Now that's significantly higher than the combined excesses of people who died in hospital and in care settings. The combined excess total of people who died in hospital and in care settings is in the region of about 45,000. So people dying at home without the right kind of medical treatment, it's now 70,000, in excess of 70,000 people. So it beggars the question, how can they continue to claim that, vaccines are saving lives when in fact all of their combined policies for the last 18 months have actually caused far more unrelated deaths at home. A lot of people are not getting the treatment that they require. So this is a fundamental breakdown in healthcare and in the state.
Well, this is something actually that the Oliver Letwin and the Tories have been campaigning for decades.
What, the breakdown in healthcare?
Well, the end of the National Health Service.
Right, and we know that the British NHS and other socialist systems, social healthcare systems in Europe, they're a gold mine for the private companies who would just swoop in and pick out the easy pickings, which they're already doing in the NHS. So with it contracting out all the easiest, most profitable sectors of the NHS. The key failings here are on the left, I believe. The left have failed utterly in grasping the bull by the horn and in protecting the whole system of the NHS. They're just failing to grasp the issue. It's very worrying at this point. It's incredibly disturbing to see.
Obviously you're in touch with quite a few people in the UK here, but how's things in Turkey?
Well, Turkey hasn't gone full on COVID mental. I mean, it was fairly draconian last year. In fact, in many respects, it was probably more draconian than the UK because we had some quite nasty lockdowns. It's pretty much akin to what the rest of Europe is doing, but in a much more laissez-faire sort of way. They've introduced sort of mandatory vaccines for civil service workers and or weekly testing. I think a lot of people have succumbed to it. They've gone ahead with it. Turkey initially took the main vaccine that they purchased was the Chinese one, Sinovac. That seemed to go down fairly well. There was no spike in deaths after the Sinovac, but they ended up bringing in Pfizer. And, I suspect that may have had something to do with Germany insisting that Turkey bought Pfizer in order for them to open their gates for German tourists to come to Turkey. So I feel like it could quite possibly have been some sort of business negotiation. And so now many people are taking the Pfizer jab. Schools are all back. In Turkey, they were off. My daughter is in the middle school system, and she was off. Literally, she had zero face-to-face class time for 1.5 years. 1.5. No class time at all, no face-to-face teaching. And it was catastrophic. I mean, that effect on the children's education was so catastrophic that they have insisted that all children go back this year. So all children are back in school this year. There is no testing. Children in Turkey have never been subjected to any sorts of weekly testing of any kind of testing whatsoever. So it's. I think they're trying to carry on. My feeling about Turkey is that they're trying to negotiate this agenda without completely destroying the country's economy. But it's already pretty much in the doldrums like everywhere else. And it's a balancing act. Turkey is constantly walking a balancing act between Russia and NATO.
Yeah, bit of a tightrope, that one. Anyway, look, Katharine, thanks ever so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Speak to you again soon.